Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Alex Vines. I'm the director of the Africa program at Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. I am actually in Chatham House today, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this reflection on Mozambique's Peace and National Reconciliation Agreement 1 year on. As many of you know, it's a year since the agreement was signed in Maputo, the Acordo de Maputo, and today we have a panel of speakers to reflect on the significance of that accord and to look forward about how it might progress. So I just want to remind everybody that this is a fully public meeting. It's fully on the record. It will be recorded, and the recording will be available for you afterwards if you want to distribute it or to look at it again. So the first thing I want to do is just reflect slightly for our audience, because it is a global audience from many, many countries, on what has actually occurred in Mozambique in terms of peace over the last few decades. And so I have a few slides that I just want to show as reminders before we then have a discussion. If I can have the first slide, please. So obviously, these are the speakers. A number of us were present at the signing of the peace accord on August the 6th, 2019 in Maputo. Here you have a photograph of that agreement. As you can see, Mirko Manzoni is there as one of the witnesses, as the personal representative of the UN Secretary General. You can also see President Chissano, President Kikwete of former President of Tanzania, and many others observing, and in fact, Dom Zupi, who is Cardinal and was part of the San Egidio process and the Rome process originally. Next slide, please. This is a reminder that this is a conflict in Mozambique that goes back decades. It's over 40 years old, probably started in 1977. And this map just is a reminder of the areas of RENAMO's strength and presence in 1993. So there was a patchwork of concentrations across the country, and this is a reminder of how it was. This map was drawn up by the United Nations, and then we ourselves at Chatham House have done further interviewing. Next slide, please. Now, the peace process, the Rome General Peace Accord of October 1992 did survive for over 20 years, and I would argue was a pretty successful peace process. But there was then a resumption of conflict in two phases from 2013 to 14 and 2015 and 16, very much concentrated in central Mozambique, which also required armed convoys. So this was a response by RENAMO, the main opposition party in Mozambique, for targeted violence as a spearhead for a political dispute, and re-engaged a series of peace processes. There was a faith process, which was followed by one where internationals were involved. Some of them are with us today, known as the Avenida process, because it was in the Avenida Hotel in Maputo. And then finally, as I have argued, there is the Manzoni process, which was led by Mirko Manzoni, and that resulted in the agreement of August last year. We are now in an implementation phase of that agreement. Next slide, please. For those who want more detail, we at Chatham House did produce a report this time last year, one in Portuguese, one in English. The Portuguese version has the full text of the agreements from last year. So those are available on our website if you're interested. Next slide, please. All of this is about politics and about inclusive politics. And last year, there was at this time an assumption that following the municipal elections in 2018 in Mozambique, that RENAMO would do well in the national elections. And this was based on a series of assumptions of electoral returns. And as you can see in this slide, after municipal elections, you then see an improvement of the opposition in national elections. That was the assumption. But the 2019 elections, and if we can have the next slide, please. bucks that trend. So in fact, we see a significant decline of RENAMO vote in 2019 elections. Many of you were, if you're in Mozambique, obviously you voted. I had the privilege of being an observer for the Commonwealth Observer Group at those elections. The results were a surprise. We had all gone into those elections assuming that RENAMO would do better, at least maybe winning a majority in a couple of provinces, at the most 3. The result actually was that RENAMO didn't win any majority at all in any province, and that meant that RENAMO wasn't eligible to nominating a governor for those particular provinces that it might have won. Decentralization, as we will hear, was a very central part of the assumptions of this agreement that was signed last year. And so this was unexpected, and I think we'll hear more about it. Next slide, please. So we then have an increase of attacks, and this is by a splinter group, particularly the Junta Militar by Mariano Ngongo. And this is just an indication that peace process is difficult, they have setbacks, and splinter groups are not necessarily unusual. Plenty of examples of peace agreements show that there are splinter groups that continue to conduct armed violence. Indeed, if you look at the Northern Ireland process here within the United Kingdom, you do see armed groups still sometimes causing violence, although the main Irish Republican Army reached agreement. And please, the final slide. But one thing that has been happening is there has been significant progress. So one of the surprises for myself and many observers was the number of people eligible from RENAMO to be demobilized and reintegrated, 5,221. I had assumed it would be probably around 1,000. And the message is that despite a shock election result, despite the existence of a RENAMO splinter group that has been engaged in armed violence, and despite COVID-19, over 10% of RENAMO combatants have now been processed and been through DDR, and 2 assembly areas, a RENAMO base at Mushungwe and a RENAMO base at Dundu have been closed. So progress has been made, and as you can see, 10.6% of total combatants have now been processed, and this is an ongoing process. So that's the context, I hope, from which we have a discussion, and it's my great pleasure, I've mentioned him already, to introduce to you Mirko Manzoni. He is the personal envoy for Mozambique of the UN Secretary General and was appointed in that position in July 2019. Between 2014 and 2019, he was the ambassador of Switzerland in Mozambique and was actively involved in the peace process from 2016 onwards, including as the president of the contact group to the peace process. His previous roles include head of cooperation for the Swiss Embassy in Mali, program manager for Poland and Malta, and he's also worked as a delegate for the International Committee of the Red Cross in both the Democratic Republic of Congo and Iraq. Mirko, thank you very much for agreeing to open this reflection of 1 year of the peace process in Mozambique. I know you're in Switzerland, and I'm very grateful that you've made time to speak to us today. Let me hand over to you to reflect on the significance of this peace process 1 year on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to open this event. I think that I would like first of all to congratulate the Mozambicans and the leadership of Mozambique for this peace, because they are the first actor of this process. We never wanted to, it's not really the Manzoni process. This is definitely the process of Mozambicans. We wanted a process owned by them. I think it is an historic day. We have to try to work all together to make possible that it will remain an historic day. The day of, I always say the day of definitive peace. Some people probably, they will continue to criticize or try to undermine this peace. But I believe that this peace needs to be considered as a milestone for a change. that will bring Mozambique in a new era of development and inclusion. I believe that the time of fighting, the time of the guns is over, and Mozambicans, they deserve a better future. But I also believe the following. I think that building peace is definitely not the job of one day. And I always say that when we signed the peace agreement, I was saying that we were just at the beginning of a long journey. And I think we are seeing clearly that, that this journey will be long, because it's the journey for building democracy, for building a new country. So I think that this job, that as I said, is not the job of one day. It should be a continuous commitment and demands the will and the effort of every Mozambican. In another perspective, I think that working for peace takes courage and the vision far greater than the mere strength of wage war. Only a great leadership is brave enough to engage in peace. Peace is difficult. Sometimes I believe really that making war is a bit easier. Working for peace is much more complicated. I believe that the leadership of Mozambique deserves our full respect. And I would like to renew my congratulations for this peace and this day. And I hope to see really all Mozambicans working together in order to make possible that this peace will be really the definitive one. I remember a few months ago, we had a discussion that was hosted by you. Some people that I think they are still today with us in this event, they were doubting very much that the DDR will happen. And I think the answer was given by the leadership of Mozambique and Mozambicans. This DDR is happening because it's needed and is due. Is due. I cannot believe, I don't want to see the combatants I could see in Mushungwe or in Dondo staying longer in the bush. It would be a shame, and is definitely, without exaggerating, against the human rights, because the condition in that basis, they are hard, tough, and they are really, I mean, and this pain should end. And we need to make possible that this DDR will succeed. Now, implementing the DDR will last at least for the next, let's say, 1.5 years. But I think the following phase, so the follow-up of the DDR, is equally important to make sure that these combatants, they will not be forgotten and they will remain. Also, I mean, they will pay attention to their future in the next months and years. So I hope we will have a good and fruitful discussion today, and I'm looking forward to listen to all comments and questions of all of you. I would like to thank you, the people that they are with us today, that they contribute very much in this process. Starting from, is a long time that I was not seeing Chaloka, so thank you very much, Chaloka, for your contribution. That Chaloka was very much involved into decentralization, which is again a long journey.
Thank you very much.
Nea, because she was part of the mediation, of course. Eduardo, the same. And all the people that anyway, they contribute very much to make possible that this day can be today celebrated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mirko. So we're going to enter into a panel discussion, which includes Mirko now. So Chaloka, since Mirko mentioned you and that he hadn't seen you, let's start with you. Chaloka, by the way, is Chaloka Biyani, and he's an associate professor of international law at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He is an expert on internally displaced persons, population transfers, mercenaries, and private military companies. He has worked on legal issues relating to decentralizing Mozambique with the government and RENAMO. So, Chaloka, given your broad experience, can you describe to me, in terms of decentralization and drafting that text for the Acordo de Maputo, what did you learn from previous Mozambican peace processes and from other examples globally? Chaloka, are you there? Have we lost Chaloka?
Okay, I didn't realize I was muted. I was beginning to say thank you very much for convening this event at the previous event, of course, which I also did participate in. And it's a happy reunion, and thanks very much to Merko for his leadership throughout this process. And thanks very much to Niha for her strategy and vision in steering and bringing most of us together. It was a surreal moment, I think, when I got involved in this process. It was on the back of involvement in the Great Lakes peace process from 2003 to 2006 and crafting peace agreements amongst the 12 or so member states. And then involvement in Kenya, where Niha was also there, drafting the Constitution of Kenya. And since then, I actually have come to realize that constitutions can be peace agreements in themselves, because the reforms that were agreed in the context of decentralization in Mozambique were also constitutionalized. So looking back in the context of previous peace agreements, I think that the political will to carry a peace agreement forward can wane at some particular point in time, when the participants or some of the parties to the peace agreement perceive the peace agreement as no longer delivering, the goods, and therefore a new state of affairs may be called for. And I think this is the situation that existed in Mozambique at the time. My heart sank when I learned of the resumption of armed hostilities in Mozambique between RENAMO and FRELIMO. And it was clear that from the point of view of RENAMO, exclusion from the body politic in terms of decentralization, having won a number of provinces, I think in the 2014 or so elections, and yet not having the ability to establish any kind of administration was a central grievance there. But related to that were also issues to do with the lack of authority of the RENAMO generals and fighters who were in the military, consistent sidelining of that authority. So in a sense, you look at what are the strategic interests of the parties involved. It was clear that on the part of RENAMO, decentralization, inclusion, political participation was quite key. On the part of FRELIMO, it was cessation of hostilities, essentially, and therefore the Military Affairs Commission was important and given a very strong highlight in that sense. So we started then looking at the terms of reference offered by President Nyusi and the late President Lakama of RENAMO. And as a mediator, the first thing you learn, of course, is that the mediation is part of the continuation of the armed process without arms. And so the start was a huge falling out between the representatives of FRELIMO and the representatives of RENAMO on the other hand, squabbling over the very terms of reference. And so we had to work to produce an action plan based on the terms of reference, and also getting back the principals to certify that indeed the terms of reference had been agreed by them, because that was disputed. The plan of action itself took some time, and we began to work backwards from when we were supposed to conclude and looking at timelines in that regard. And it then reached a stage where it was clear that when the substantive discussions began, both parties were reaching back to the proposals that had been made in the previous agreements. And a deadlock was reached. And I think at that point, Merko, Nia, and others decided that perhaps direct participation by the commissioners from both sides might not help. and that this be an expert-led process on the basis of the proposals that either party had made, and to try and reconcile those processes and then to move them forward. So in the end, that's what happened. On the one hand, there were those proposals that were agreed upon, and although not much emphasis is given to it, I have in front of me the National Agreement on Decentralization in Mozambique, which partners the National Accord for Peace and Reconciliation. Those two go hand in hand, but it's obvious that the National Accord for Peace and Reconciliation was the ultimate nail in ending the hostilities. So the agreement was constitutionalized, and then the other part of the agreement formulated into a bill on decentralization. And I think that once decentralization was unlocked, then attention paid much more to the Military Affairs Commission, and hence the National Accord for Peace and Reconciliation.
Chaloka, I mentioned the October 29 election results. Do you worry that RENAMO didn't win any province, didn't get majority in any province for this peace process? Or do you think that that it can still progress? I mean, we're seeing disarmament and reintegration still going through the DDR process. So how do you see the shadow of the October 2019 election results on this peace accord?
Yes, there's a shadow that lingers over it because clearly the expectations on the part of RENAMO were very, very high going into from decentralization and going into the electoral process, particularly in central to northern Mozambique. However, I see this as a dynamic process because the one factor that perhaps is not very much highlighted in all of this was the untimely death of Lakama himself, who had great support and following personally in most of the areas that RENAMO led. And with that, RENAMO had to start almost from afresh with a new leadership that had to sell itself to the people and the supporters of RENAMO. And as you mentioned, of course, splinter groups emerging out of that and perhaps not driving great confidence on the part of the followers, and some of the followers also being split. Whereas FRELIMO remained cohesive. And it's true that within FRELIMO too, I mean, there were those who clearly were not very much pro-decentralization because they didn't configure exactly how that would affect the electoral outcomes. But with that electoral outcome, whereas FRELIMO's political hand would have been bolstered, RENAMO's would have been weakened. But I see this as a dynamic process that RENAMO will cultivate its political support base in those areas with the current leadership. And I think that the real test, again, will come at the next elections for a number of reasons. One is the RENAMO leadership would have strengthened itself and established its base. There'll be a change of leadership in FRELIMO because President Nyusi is now serving his final term. So again, it will be up to FRELIMO to cultivate a new political base for its leader, even if it does have a major political base. But it's quite clear that before the 2019 elections, RENAMO was eating into FRELIMO's political base. And I think that we can probably expect that this will happen around the next elections. That's my projection.
Thank you, Chaloka. We talk a lot about RENAMO, and so I think I should turn to Eduardo Nambaretti. He's a senior lecturer and the founding dean of the School of Communication and Arts at Eduardo Mondlane University. He was also a former member of parliament for RENAMO from 2005 to 2010 and has been deeply engaged in these negotiations between the government of Mozambique and RENAMO since 2013. He, like myself and Chaloka, were in the audience a year ago watching the signing of the agreement on the 6th of August. Eduardo, what drove you to become a mediator? What was it that made you want to become part of this mediation process, which you became such an important part of?
He's muted.
Are you there, Eduardo? Can you unmute yourself?
Okay. Yes, I was thanking you, Alex, and the
Okay.
Chatham House for inviting me to participate in this talk, and congratulating the Chatham House for the celebration of its 100th year of independent thinking.
Thank you.
Well, I was involved, or I have been involved in this process, not by choice, I would say. I did not volunteer. I was picked. Probably the person who picked me, who will be in a better position to explain why he picked me. But as a Mozambican, I could not say no. It was my duty to serve my country for such an important task, to find peace for Mozambique. As you rightly said, I have been involved in the seeking of the peace in Mozambique since 2012, 2013, somewhere there. Because the problems of the conflicts in Mozambique, as you rightly indicated in your slide, showing the progress of the elections in Mozambique, the root cause of the conflicts in Mozambique, I would say it is the outcome of the elections, which leads to the access to power. It's through election. And if one party is denied that access, which is a legitimate through the vote of the people, then we have a problem there. And this is what has been happening. And in complaining, since the election 2009, President Lakama did not agree with the results, and he started touring the country, holding his rally to explain his constituencies that he does not agree with the results, and for that reason he was performing what the Constitution gives him as the right to demonstrate peacefully. And on the contrary of this acceptance for him to demonstrate peacefully, he was being attacked. We remember that he was attacked in his house in Satunjira. That was in 2012, if I'm not wrong, 2012 or 2013, which made him leave Satunjira to the mountain for protection. And the negotiation process started, and when we reached a point where we could settle this dispute, he came back in 2014 to Maputo for the signing of the peace agreement with the President Gebuza. We went for election in October 2014. Again, the results were rigged, the elections were rigged. He went back also to his constituency to explain what happened and did not agree with the results, which is unacceptable. It's acceptable in any democratic country to peacefully demonstrate and show that you do not accept the outcome of the results. Again, he was attacked on the 12th and 25th of September in Manica by the armed forces when he was coming back to Beira. He had to flee again to the mountain for his hide to be, for his protection. The process continued, and he was convinced that he could come back to Maputo also to meet President Nyusi and settle all these disputes, that the provinces where RENAMO got majority, he should be given the right to appoint the governors. That was the proposal. This is what he was telling his constituency, that this is what we want in order to settle this. Of course, the Constitution did not provide for such arrangement at the time, but it was on the table for discussion. He went back to Beira on his way to Maputo to meet President Nyusi. He was surrounded in Beira in his house. His house was assaulted by the police. They said they were looking for weapons that were taken from the army during the attack in Vanduzi. After that attack, in fact, this is what triggered him to go back to the bush until 28.
Has he frozen? I think you're frozen, Eduardo. If you want to turn your...
When he found his death. because there has never been this assurance of its safety when you demonstrate peacefully.
Eduardo, maybe you should turn your
comes
camera
from
on because
in the elections.
Yeah, that's it. Please continue.
Okay. Yes. So I was bringing all this history into context to say that the problems of the conflict.
What I suggest is, we've lost you, Eduardo, is you might need to...
Of course, we may have many is the outcome of the election. Results of the elections were RENAMO. Hello?
Yeah, please continue. We can hear you. Yeah.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear us?
Okay. So, yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when we talk peace, we have to understand the root cause of the conflict in Mozambique, particularly after the 25 years of relative peace, after the 1992 peace agreement. We started having these problems from the elections of 2009. That's when we started getting new problems coming out. And this was not a coincidence that even the government itself, when President Gebuza came into power, the new administration changed the approach of dealing with RENAMO. Repression was high, the limitation of freedoms was visible, and that is when we started having those attacks to those who were peacefully demonstrating, those who were peacefully assembling to claim their right that are constitutionally established, and to also say that we do not agree with the result. Now, we reached an agreement a year ago. Of course, unfortunately, President Akama could not witness that agreement, but the peace agreement itself did not ignore the issue of decentralization, did not ignore that this was a major problem to ensure that Mozambique will have a long-lasting peace. The last year's elections, they show us again that we have not sorted out the root causes of the conflict, because we have not seen either any sign that we are moving towards a reconciliation, we are moving towards integration, we are moving towards a sharing of power, which has been the main reason why RENAMO has always voiced its concern with regards to peace. I'm happy that we're celebrating now 1 year. We have gone 10% of the demobilization of the armed groups, and this should proceed until we conclude this process. But we should never forget where these problems are coming from. And as we go with the DDR and sorting out the military issues, we should not only be happy with the ending the military conflict itself without touching.
I think you've muted yourself, Eduardo. Something's happened.
No, I think I was muted from that side.
Okay. All right. Please make your conclusion about...
Yes, my conclusion, Alex, is that as we go with addressing the military issues, Professor Chaloka put it very correctly, that the decentralization part of the peace deal was somehow overshadowed by the military affairs. Of course, all Mozambicans want to see the country in peace. But in order to sustain this peace, we should not forget the root cause of this conflict. That's why I was saying that as we go with the DDR process, we should not forget to discuss or to go back and look into the decentralization process, not only the writing in the constitution, to see its implementation, because this is what can ensure us that Mozambique will then engage in an integration process, will engage in a power sharing process. That is what will bring peace to the country. Otherwise, we may have a peace that will last for a certain period, I don't know for how long, until, again, such issues are brought up to the table for discussions again. So we are very conscious, and we have to be always conscious and remind ourselves why Mozambique is having conflicts. And even if you see when those frictions start, it's always after the election. So knowing that after any election, we will have a problem, we need to address that issue clearly and have a very structured approach so that when we have elections, we don't have such situation that will lead us to go back again and sit and negotiate the quietness of the weapons.
Mirko, I'd like to ask you, how do you see this issue of decentralization playing out? But also, Eduardo, I think, was referring to the importance of development and showing that DDR isn't just a technical process, that it's a long open-ended one about poverty reduction and development. And I know you've been very active in trying to encourage investors to look at areas of central Mozambique, which were RENAMO strongholds, including Nespresso. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that too, of how you can see development going into these areas that the reintegrated are returning to, be they in Manica and Sofala or Zambezia, for example, after passing through the closed camps of Dondo and Mushungwe.
I can only say the following. I fully agree with Eduardo, definitely. As I said, peace is not the job of one day. And we have to consider that decentralization was the core of the negotiation, basically, and the most important point for LACAMA. So, but I think that the question of decentralization is really exactly the problem of inclusion. It is definitely, I mean, not all Mozambicans, they are voting FRELIMO, of course, and so they need to be equally represented also in the society in general. And I think this point is very important. It's something that need to happen. I don't believe that this should happen with the guns. It's probably the time to try to change also strategy and find a different way to get this result. What I believe is that the same for DDR. As I said, disarming these people is an important point, but following their life after this 1 year, 2 years of DDR is even more important. I think when we talk about dignity, we have to treat them exactly like we would treat a normal soldier going to be retired. And there will be a process which will be critical, of course. But it's part, in my opinion, of the reintegration and reconciliation. It is how we will treat these people after this period of demobilization, which is the question of pension, of course. It is a difficult topic. It's a topic we are starting to discuss now, and is a topic that we have to sort out before the end of the demobilization. I believe that the other points, as you said, is development. Mozambique, the poverty is everywhere. We cannot create a specific category of Mozambicans, which are the former RENAMO combatants, but it's true that we have to give at least equal opportunity to them to be properly reintegrated into the society and have an opportunity to build up a new life and to have an opportunity to support their families. We are trying, as I said, also to involve and to engage with the private sector. And this, as I said, slowly is working. We start to have results. And I think there is a chance that really also the private sector will help this process to succeed.
Thank you, Mirko. I think we'll turn now to Nea Sangracha, who is a senior advisor to the peace process in Mozambique with over 12 years of experience in conflict prevention and resolution, mediation and peace building. She was formerly working for Kofi Annan while he was chair of the Kenyan peace process in 2007. She is a Kenyan, and she's been working in Mozambique as a mediator and negotiator. between the government and RENAMO. So look, Nay, you've been involved in many of the peace processes. I don't know if you were involved with the FAIF process. You were certainly very involved with the Avenida one. What was the learning that you took from those previous processes for the mediation efforts that really took off from late 2016 and resulted in the Accord of Maputo and the other accord that was signed in Gorongosa a year ago this week?
Thank you, Alex. I completely agree with most of what Mirko has been saying on national ownership. I think what the other processes taught me is, and I do want to speak a little bit on this, is really we say the words national ownership, but we don't really internalize it. You know, this process taught me two things. One, that peace or any agreement can never be imposed from the outside. That's one, and it has to be believed by the people of the country affected. Just to give you a bit of a Kenyan context, when things were going bad in Kenya, there was a minister who came and said to me, you know, we only have one passport. This is our home. We cannot, if things fall apart in Kenya, we cannot run anywhere else. And that struck a chord with me. And I kind of saw the same thing happening in Mozambique. And so this spoke to me quite intensely. I saw and learned very deeply the strengths and the weaknesses of the international community, which we so very much need. In terms of national ownership, you know, we see ourselves and we see what's out there in the newspapers and the media, but what we don't see are the multitude of people working behind the scenes, whether it's advisors in the president's office, whether it's RENAMO parliamentarians, whether it is the police, the local government. There are multiple actors and all Mozambican who work day and night, who are the hidden stars, who are the hidden voices, who make a huge effort to get the train on track. And I think that's the biggest learning lesson for me personally, which is, you know, peace is not just log frames, indicators, words on a piece of paper. It's actually, you know, the combatant who is worried that his child will not recognize him after so long away. It's the woman who cannot do business on the side of the road because there is a conflict. So Mozambique taught me that these are the kind of things that really matter when it comes down to it. It's easy to write sitting from behind a desk. It's easy to write op-eds and to pontificate on a conflict in a country. But it's very difficult, as Mirko said earlier, to be one, optimistic, but two, to be persistent and keep going. And as he said most of what I wanted to say, which is actually this day belongs to those people that I mentioned. It belongs to the Ministry of Health, who in the midst of a COVID pandemic are working together with our team at all the bases, who have eternal patience. The difference between Kenya and Mozambique is Kenyans are very direct and Mozambicans are very nice. And when I say this, I say this part in jest, but really, in Mozambique, it's what is unsaid that you have to really listen to. Asking for help, whether it's a country, whether it's the people, is the most difficult thing somebody can do. It means that you have to be vulnerable. And so when a country or a leadership asks for help from someone, this is the most important thing, and we must respect and treasure it. And both those previous processes taught me when I compared to this one. Because, you know, these are people's lives. We can pick up and leave, but they're here for generations, for their children, etc. And so listening is something that I think really matters here in this context.
Now, I wanted to ask you about shocks in the peace process. So the first shock that I felt was the May 2018 one, the death of Declama, the president of RENAMO. That was unexpected. How dangerous was that moment for the peace process in your view? And the second shock, I suppose, would be the election results and the related splinter group of RENAMO, Junta Militaire. How worried are you by the Junta Militaire in spoiling the process that's underway currently?
So I'll start with your first question on the death of President Lakama of RENAMO. It was a shock. That is an understatement. I mean, for me personally, it's something I never anticipated, never thought of. It quite floored a lot of us. You know, we were so close. We were so close to a lot of positivity, and you know, we finally got to where we wanted to go, and then suddenly, out of the blue. So yeah, it was. But here again, I think it was a dangerous point, but I think it was mitigated completely by the RENAMO members around President Lakama at the time, around the new president Momade, the current president Momade. So it's RENAMO who did a lot and should be credited for holding the party together, for holding, for continuing and being dedicated to the peace process. Whatever else was said in the press or done in the press, the one thing, and I think Mirko can attest to, is that to us, they remained completely dedicated to the peace process. And the same on the government side. It takes a lot of courage and bravery to go out of your shell, to go out of what is normal. The death of Lakama made waves on both sides. But for example, the funeral in Beira, that was, I believe, a moment of reconciliation. We talk so often about reconciliation, but we don't notice that it's happening every day. So these are the kind of things that also makes one reflect. You know, for the last 3 years now, we've had the Military Affairs Commission, the Joint Technical Working Groups, and we've had the monitors who are represented by RENAMO and the government, and they've been working and basically living together on this peace process together with us and carrying the heavy load. It is these monitors in Gorongosa, it is the Military Affairs Commission that go out on the field visits, that painstakingly push this process forward. And they come from both sides and they work together. And so this is what I think saved the moment of Lakama's passing and the subsequent aftermath. It is the silent unity and the silent resilience of the Mozambican people themselves that really pushed this process forward. We were just lucky to be able to help in whatever way we could.
And how lucky were you to have Eduardo there with you as part of your team? Tell me, Nea, how important is teamwork for this sort of activity?
So Eduardo and I, we argue and we fight and probably annoy each other constantly. Let me just say I annoy him constantly because we are so different. I am the opposite of Eduardo Nambarate in every respect. But we have one thing in common. At least I think so. I have great respect for him. This is a person who never complains, climbs mountains. You know, he goes out of his way. He makes personal and professional sacrifices. So yes, I have a lot of respect for Eduardo. I think teamwork in this kind of thing is essential, but also we have to have a common goal. I think the four of us, Jonathan, Mirko, Eduardo, everyone who was involved in this process so far, we had one thing in common. We knew what we wanted, and we knew that we would not give up. And so we helped each other along the way.
Now, we're running out of time before moving to the discussants, but I do just want a reflection on the Junta Militaire. So we talked about RENAMO of Mr. Momade, but how about the splinter group? Is it troublesome? Do you worry about it? Do you get sleepless nights? Or do you think it's a resolvable challenge? I remember, I think that at least through Mushunge and Dundu, 6 former Junta Militaire have now been processed. So clearly there is a trickle of people leaving the junta also now.
So I'm always worried about everything, as Mirko and Eduardo will attest to. But I think I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't continue if I did not think that there was a solution, if I did not believe that there was a way forward on this issue. But on this, honestly, Alex, it's probably Mirko who is the expert on this, basically, who has been the one who has been talking to Nyongo. So I think that question is for Mirko. He's much better at answering it.
Mirko, we'll turn to you and then we'll go to the discussants. How concerned are you about the junta militaire, or do you think they can be reintegrated into this main process?
I think they have to be, and they must be reintegrated into that process also because they deserve that process. That is the problem. You know, Nyongo and the people that they are with Nyongo, they were with Lakama and they were fighting and struggling with Lakama for years. So you have to consider that they deserve this process. Then it's difficult, I agree, in a sense that what happened, the attacks and the issues like that, they definitely are not helping in easily reintegrate them. I believe also that it's difficult today to understand exactly to what exactly are claiming still, because I think, you know, the negotiation, the process, the peace was a compromise. You cannot just look at one perspective and say, I give you all and you give me everything. So in a peace agreement is always a compromise at the end. You try to find the best for both sides. And I believe that this is exactly what we never wanted, the perfect process. But I think that also the DDR is showing that what is given today to these combatants is what Lakama wanted. I think I fully agree with some arguments that I heard from Nyongo, from other people, that there are still issues that they really have to be discussed in Mozambique, but are part of let's say, a follow-up that need to be done, part of reconciliation, part of building a proper democracy also in Mozambique. You know, when we talk about institutions like the army, like CISE, like institutions that they should protect the state in a way, they depend from the state, this discussion is open. But I don't think that is now the reason to go back and fighting and then shooting people and killing people. This, no, I am sorry. I strongly believe that the problem of Nyongo will and can be managed, and I'm fully committed to make it possible. And let's say we have to work, but it's not something that can happen so fast. And you know, it's long discussion as usual.
Yeah. Thank you, Mirko. And for those that were listening who might not be familiar, but CISE is the intelligence services in Mozambique. So we now turn to our two academic discussants. And the first one is Nikki Wyckneck, and she's the author of a book only just published called Former Guerrillas in Mozambique. I've read it, I recommend it. And the special thing about Nikki is that she spent a significant amount of time, maybe up to 18 months, in one of the districts in central Mozambique that was a RENAMO stronghold in, I think it was 2013, maybe 2012, 2013, probably 2012, in fact, before the renewed conflict started. So Nikki, you've heard the mediators speak, you've heard Mirko give his presentation. How does that sit with your own deep anthropological research? Sitting there for 18 months with RENAMO's ex-combatants. Thank you also, Nikki, for joining us. I know that you're on holiday at the moment in Italy, so I'm very grateful for you breaking your holiday to speak to us. Nikki is an assistant professor of the Department of Cultural Anthropology at the University of Utrecht. Nikki, over to you.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for inviting me. Very happy to have a little break from my holiday, to be part of this all and to speak at this event, to commemorate and reflect on this with you all. So yeah, so I was asked to serve as a discussant based on this book that I wrote based on my fieldwork that was mainly done in Maringwe with former combatants, and it is, yeah, indeed from these stories that I will reflect on reintegration. And I think my starting point, or some of the starting points, will be, and it is something also that Mirko said, that should be made sure that these combatants will not be forgotten, and that there should be some kind of dignified treatment of these combatants. And I would stress, and their communities, and this will be central for the long-term process of reintegration and peace, because I also wanted to start on one of the arguments, but it's partly an academic argument, but I think it's also important in these processes, that reintegration is actually a very unlucky term, because it seems to suggest that we are going back to some situation that was before, some kind of status quo, but that on the one hand is of course impossible, and on the other hand I would say it's also not desirable, and I will say something more about that. But it also suggests that these combatants, that they will be or become then like everybody else again. And if one thing, if my research with these desmobilizados in Maringwe showed one thing, is that they will always be war veterans, and they have some kind of attachment to this particular period, to this war, and thereby also to some kind of history making almost. And this is very political. And Mozambique has a strong history of celebrating war veterans. Of course, the war veterans of the Liberation War, the antiguos combatentes. And the former combatants that I spoke to in Maringwe at the time, they imagined their position to be somewhat similar to these antiguos combatentes. They would say, oh, these antiguos combatentes, they fought for independence, but we fought for democracy. And you can agree or not agree with this statement, but it's not empty rhetoric in a way. It entails these expectations these combatants or former combatants had, and it also implies some status, some symbolic status, but also benefits. And Mirko was already talking about pensions, but this was some of the expectations these former combatants had. And as a consequence, these former combatants will not be like everybody else. And reintegration is then very much also about political integration and dignified integration. And this is, as has also been said, of course, a very long-term process. It's about inclusion, because it points to some of these core drivers of the conflict itself, and which is of course exclusion and the marginal situation of many Mozambicans, especially in rural parts, but also elsewhere. And this includes former RENAMO combatants. As one former combatant told me, he said, "Son pocos Moçambicanos só." We are only a little bit Mozambicans. So this sense of not being full citizens of the state, and having also limited access to the resources of the state. And this is not only about these combatants, of course, but it is also about their communities who are, I think, and should be part of this reintegration process. And they are also part of what RENAMO is. RENAMO, of course, is a political party, but it also, as I've argued elsewhere, it's also a bigger network of social relations, of religious relations, of economic relations, and it's these wider rural communities that I think should also be part of this process. And in that sense, reintegration is not best measured by these numbers of combatants who are processed, but by other markers that are actually more difficult to define. And I would, one of the questions I would have for the panel is to reflect on that a little bit. Like how can these wider communities of these former combatants be included in these processes? and how can then DDR as a process be a step towards a more politically inclusive Mozambique? How do the panelists see this happening? And then I had some concluding thoughts, because one of the things that I saw in my research is this is also about the stories that are told about history, about, let's say, Mozambique's recent political history. And there was of course this long, for a long time, this particular dominant narrative about the past, which largely focuses, if you think about former combatants or war veterans, on this heroic liberation struggle for independence. And RENAMO veterans have long been seen as these unworthy war veterans, as bandidos armados. And so my question is also what other stories might be there, what other stories might be developed, and how can these stories be as diverse as possible, and how can this debate be open? And I think this peace agreement and this whole process, and then again also this event is part of that. So again, I want to thank you for inviting me. And one of my questions to the panelists would also be how they see this process as part of new narratives about Mozambique's history.
Nikki, thank you very much for that. And we will still have good time for a Q&A session with the panel, and we'll feed your questions into them for sure. I want to turn to our second discussant, who is Kees Kigma, and he's an expert in post-conflict development and reintegration of war-affected populations and demilitarization. He was in Mozambique last year doing a study, I think, funded by the EU. I bumped into him just as I was arriving for the Mozambican elections, and he was leaving, so we crossed our paths at Mabalani International Airport. But he's also this year written a paper called Umoyao DDR in Curso in Mozambique, so a look at the DDR underway in Mozambique for YASA. Kees, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you see this DDR process and how does it fit more broadly with your experience of 30 years at looking at other processes? So what are the lessons for Mozambique this time round in particular?
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for the opportunity to make some comments. I'm very happy to hear people reporting on the achievements over the past year, and I do commend also all of the parties and the individuals involved in all of this for the work done. And I'm very hopeful that although slow, but as Mirko says, this is not going to be done over a day or two, that this will continue to be a positive process. I have been asked, particularly like you just said, I've been involved in several other operations of DDR, particularly around Africa, both as an analyst as well as management supervision roles. So I'll make some comments, particularly from a perspective of other experiences elsewhere. So rather than saying something about the look on the ongoing DDR, where I'm sure people like Neha, Eduardo, and Mirko are much better up to date, I will actually try to take one step back and then say a few things of how I see things. And some might come across a bit as comments of caution or warning, but I do think that it is useful to see what has happened elsewhere and what this process can learn. One particular thing is the big picture, is like the fact that the DDR becomes so prominent in this discussion. And although I spend a lot of time, like you said, on these issues, I would like to tone that down a bit. And also, I heard Eduardo saying that we shouldn't get drifted away from the more fundamental political issues. And having said that, I do think that an important component element of this peace agreement and the DDR that flows from it is that it actually agrees on a complete demobilization and disarmament of RENAMO, which is even different from what was agreed in the Rome Agreement. It is a total disarmament. And that I think is very essential, and that also makes it a bit difficult to see, particularly the fact that the military junta is still out there, that what currently is going on is 10%, but we have a perspective of not being able to achieve the full disarmament and demobilization, which could be difficult. And what I'm actually want all of us to be cautious of is that it becomes some sort of chipping away on RENAMO. And I'm referring particularly to two other cases, particularly, say, South Sudan and also Eastern Congo, where DDR has become something that, has been, they tried to make it a tool towards peace rather than a part of the bigger puzzle of the peace effort. So I'm warning against seeing DDR as something to get to the peace rather than to help strengthen the actual processes. That is one point I want to say. The other one is a bit of a concern that I have about the composition of the target group. And Alex, actually, you referred to it, and I actually quoted in the paper. I quoted something you said around the time of the agreement, that the figure of 5,221 sounds to many observers as a bit of a high figure. And this could, and I'm not saying it would, but it could be difficult in the longer term, particularly if the figure and the list that is associated with it leads to entitlements. I mean, leads to specific, money being paid or entitlement for certain elements of reintegration support down the line, where people might question the list, like you said, in terms of the numbers. From what I know, it is a list of virtually all men, 95% men, which could lead, obviously, when it is associated with a resource flow into the communities. It has a gender implications that are negative. And it also is a list of old men. I think the median age was even a few years over 50 and has become 1 year older now. Or maybe we don't know. I mean, the list might have also have shrunk. But anyway, these are relatively old men. So we should see what it means in terms of the reintegration realities of these people, whether they should really be seen as people that have are willing to pick up a new profession, that are, going to be very economically active, or whether they are merely, returning to their community and, playing the role what is expected to be of old men. So that is one thing. Associated with the list is also the question, and it goes back to my earlier point, when will the DDR be done? Because is it going to be over when these 5,000 plus people will all have received or have returned home and received a package, or would that still be open at that point? Obviously, it also relates to a point that I made in the paper, is the expectations. What do people see as reintegrating into the community, and to what extent do they expect assistance to that reintegration, and also what is the perception of the communities in which they return, in terms of the benefits they get, in terms of how they integrate socially, so both among the ex-combatants as well as the communities. I find the point that Mirko made about pensions very interesting, and actually I should turn it into a question, because I'm obviously not up to date on that. That is a more fundamental reintegration process, obviously, if you recognize the status of these people in terms of a pension at par with other people that served in the regular national military or security forces. So that would be very interesting. But obviously, in terms of the criteria, similarly to my question about the list itself, what are the criteria that have been used to compile that list? Or is it merely something that's been agree to politically. So these two, I have more things, but let me limit it to this. These two areas I would like to contribute to this discussion, and also the specific question to Mirko. Thank you.
Kees, thank you very much for that. And that now opens us up for a Q&A session. I'm going to take some of the written Q&As first and ask various of the panelists to respond, and then we'll open up for verbal Q&A. So please don't go away. We still have 45 minutes to go. One question we have here is from Richard Kaminski, and I think maybe Eduardo Nambaretti, maybe you could answer this. Hold on for the moment in answering, but he says he's quite surprised that the panel hasn't commented on the 29 election and mentioned its flaws. He draws attention to that there were real problems on registration. For example, voters in Gaza was one example of that. So I wonder, Eduardo, if you might reflect from your perspective of the 29 election result. We touched on it obviously in that RENAMO didn't win a majority in any province, but maybe interrogate that a bit further. There were several questions about what is the learning for Cabo Delgado. So we had a couple of people asking a question. Madalena, but also Rafael asked about how does the DDR-SSR process and the peace process more broadly, what could be the learning for Cabo Delgado? And I wonder if, well, maybe Nea, you could consider that question. Mirko, you have Kees's question about pensions. I wonder if you could answer that. And there was also one about how gender sensitive is this process. And we heard from Kees also talking about that the majority of those passing through the DDR process, so the majority of the 1,221 are male. And so I think, Nea, maybe you could kind of consider answering the gender one, about the gender sensitivity, but also about the inclusion process looking beyond to the broader family of ex-combatants. I'll come back with more questions to panelists, but maybe we should start off with Eduardo, if you'd like to answer the question about the impact of the 2019 elections. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. As I was saying in my previous intervention, that the peace process in Mozambique is closely related to election processes. And of course, the expectation of the 2019 elections was that it will be a moment when those issues will be settled. Remember that one of the claims of President Dhlakama was that the provinces where RENAMO got majority should be allowed to appoint governors. That was not in our constitution. In our constitution framework was not possible because it was not made such. But after the agreement for decentralization, there was an inclusion for the election of governors, not appointment of the governor. But of course, this process again was not transparent. You were here as an international observer, and many other international observers. The reports that we read from the international observers, they clearly indicate that the elections were fraudulent. There was no transparency. And starting from the voter registration in the Gaza provinces, for instance, where they had numbers that were not expected. Even the chair of the National Institute of Statistics indicated that those numbers could only be achieved in 2014. It was not possible to reach those numbers in 2019. So we can see that the process that would lead to the implementation of the agreement was not carried out in a transparent way. It was not carried out to fulfill the agreement, because what we were expecting is that after the agreement, a clear, a transparent, a fair election would help Mozambique to sort out this issue, because definitely RENAMO would have appointed or would have elected some governors in some provinces. No one would believe that RENAMO lost in every province, in every district of this country. nobody can believe that. No one will accept that in just a matter of few months after the municipal elections of 2018, the situation changed dramatically to a point where RENAMO has no support in every district of this country. But this is an indication that we're still not ready for this power sharing in Mozambique. Everything was done to avoid a situation where RENAMO would have elected a single governor. Even if we consider the arrangements that were made after the agreement on the constitution, where the government established this figure of the Secretary de Estado, which was something not agreed, but it came on top of the agreement. It was to prevent, in case RENAMO would win some provinces, then this Secretary de Estado will take some of the power of that governor who will be from a different province. And we are having issues now that all the governors are from FRELIMO and all the Secretary de Estado are also from FRELIMO. We don't have a clear understanding on how those two are working in the provinces. So definitely the elections, I would say that the election of 2019, it was a missed opportunity to settle peace in Mozambique for good. Now we are waiting, hoping that in 2024, we will be able to hold elections that will not again result in some sort of conflict. I'm not talking about armed conflict, but peace is not only the absence of fighting in terms of military. The mere fact that you don't have a consensus over the national issues, where you have people who are against some of the critical issues of national interest, that shows itself that the country is not united. We have to be united, but in order to be united, all the Mozambicans, not only the ex-combatants, all the Mozambicans should feel that they have a right also to hold a position in this country. They have the right to hold, leadership position, which is not happening. And our hope in claiming this decentralization process was that through this negotiation, at last we would have at least some provinces where we could indicate that now we are sharing power. We got elected in certain provinces and we have our own governors ruling those provinces. But that was frustrated, I can say, with the massive fraud that took place during the 2019 election, which leaves us waiting to see what's going to happen in the next election. But in the meantime, while we are working in this process, I strongly believe we should do something that can give an indication to the Mozambicans that we are moving towards a real decentralization, a real sharing of power, not only in the papers where we just deceive each other to achieve certain goals. This is my view and what would have been if the elections of 2019 have been conducted in a fair and transparent way. That would have been a proper way of building consensus in the country and settling the peace, which has been now questioned. Because without the result of 2019, we are on hold to see when will be the next opportunity where we can have a true sharing of power. And this is the moment we will believe that the peace in Mozambique will be a long-lasting one. We missed an opportunity in 2019. And even after that election result of 2019, I personally hoped that the leadership of FRELIMO, understanding that the outcome of the elections of 2019, it was an opportunity to settle peace in the country, would have made an effort in the right that the president has to appoint those Secretary de Estado. At least he would have taken the initiative to say, look, the elections were rigged, the elections happened the way they happened, but in the name of reconciliation, in the name of peace building, I propose to appoint certain people to hold this position. That is my view. It's not a party view. Let's get it registered. That it's my thinking. That I thought, in the absence of a fair election, at least the outcome, at least the attempt to fix the rigging, the president should have taken some sort of measures within his own power that he has under the Constitution.
Eduardo, thank you very much. And a reminder just to the audience, if you want to ask a verbal question, use your hand function so that I know that you want to ask a question and I will come to you. Mirko, there were a number of questions for you. I wonder if you'd like to choose what to answer. There was one in particular on pensions that I remember.
Yeah, the question of pension is giving to me the opportunity to answer to more than one question. Pension is a matter of, is part of the principle of reconciliation. In a sense that if we admit that the struggle for getting better, or in order to if we admit that it was right to change this constitution in order to allow a better inclusion, it means that we justify this struggle and this fight in a way. So we have to admit that these people, they were fighting for building a better Mozambique in a way. So they need to be treated as normal soldier. That is where we are. So this question of pension, I think, is a discussion that we started. It's not an easy discussion because it needs really the openness to consider these people in the same way like a normal soldier of the army of Mozambique. Very simple. Because if not, I don't think that we need to create a specific category of people. Again, we don't have to create a pension for former RENAMO combatants. We need to provide them the pension like a normal soldier in the army of Mozambique. This is the way we are working in order to find an agreement on that. But I have to be honest, if we get this result, it is a big, important step forward in terms of reconciliation in Mozambique, because this pension is meaningful, is really meaningful.
Thank you.
Maybe one point because of the numbers, because this is also a bit a sensitive issue. 5,000, there were different speculation. There are too many. They should be 500. They should be 1,000. I don't know. The responsibility of this figure is not mine. It's not the responsibility of Eduardo or Nia or Jonathan Powell that they were with me negotiating. I believe that when I see the combatants that they are demobilized today in the base of Dondo, I was surprised anyway to see that these combatants, they are in a way organized perfectly, like even if it's true, they are old. We cannot, I have to admit that the average is quite high, but they are combatants that they still are waiting to be demobilized and to be reintegrated. I don't know if they were forgotten. I don't know if they were kept in standby, but these bases, they are really existing and they are really there with combatants that they are waiting to be reintegrated. I cannot deny that I had some doubt, but today, much less, I have to be honest, after having been there.
Thank you, Mirko. I'm going to turn to Naya, because there were a bunch of questions for you, Naya, including about, the gender dynamic, and that this is a very male-focused process. There was also a question more broadly about what is the learning of this process for Cabo Delgado? Are there any similarities, or should we just compartmentalize them differently? Clearly, the issue of decentralization, and I might turn to Chaloka, is one that involves Cabo Delgado as much as anywhere else in Mozambique, and Eduardo's talked about that. But maybe you would like to respond to those questions.
Sure, thank you, Alex. On the issue of Cabo Delgado, no, there are similarities between the way this peace process in particular has been shaped and what could be done in Cabo Delgado. Firstly, I think we can learn lessons from the successes or the process design of this particular process in terms of two things. One, trust, and two, managing the help that is being offered. So to put this very clearly, there are a lot of external actors wanting to help. Now, whether these offers are genuine or not, the point is the volume of them. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We found a difference in the peace process when we started listening to what Mozambicans are saying, but more importantly, listening to what they are not saying. So if they're not asking you for help on Cabo Delgado, don't insist or push. When Mozambique and its leadership needs help, they will come, they will ask, and it's at that point that we must do our very best for the country. So in terms of that, because anything else will just lead to confusion, wasted time, and wasted resources. There's a lot of chatter and noise on the Cabo Delgado issue, but it's not, what is happening in Mozambique is not unique. We have this problem elsewhere in the world, particularly also in my country. What is different is that I believe fundamentally that this is a solution that can be found by Mozambicans, whether they are religious leaders on the ground, the leadership, all Mozambicans. So where the peace process finishes, Cabo Delgado starts. That is one thing that all Mozambicans have in common. They need a solution for Cabo Delgado, and they need it to go back to normal. But the only way to do it is, one, to work together, and two, for us, the internationals or the externals or the outsiders, to actually listen to what is needed. And I think if we adopt the peace process framework and style of working in Cabo Delgado, there will be, there'll be significant changes on that. But the most important thing I can say, the most important similarity or lessons learned is, again, going back to listen, listen, listen. In terms of the gender one, normally this issue of gender, sometimes it gets reduced to ticking a box. In the peace process, we have tried to be gender sensitive, but at the end of the day, we kept our eye on the goal. And the goal was finding the solution that Mozambicans wanted at that time. So we never insisted that there should be women in the process or in the room. We never insisted on things just to satisfy an inclusion aspect. But in terms of inclusion, it's very important, because studies and general life shows us that when women are involved, you get one major thing: empathy. And with empathy comes a more inclusive, more successful peace process, and more sustainable, where women are involved. However, I must admit, we did not insist on what we could not achieve. We kept our eye on the goal. Of course, we could do a lot better in this regard. In terms of inclusivity, this isn't only a DDR for the RENAMO ex-combatants. It's a community approach. The community where the combatants are going home, it involves women, children, the whole community. And again, it's an all actors kind of a solution. Where the DDR soldiers where the ex-combatants are going home, it's local government that is welcoming them in. It's really funny to see, but again, I come to the point of reconciliation. It is, at the end of the day, a nationally driven process. And for us, that is the most amazing thing about this, because at the end of the day, in the village that they are there, it is the local government actors, it is the neighbors in the particular place who are welcoming them back home. When you have parliamentarians in the country who are visiting provinces and visiting places where the combatants are going back, or if you have members of government, whether they're ministers, the prime minister, they always speak on this issue of DDR and how it takes a village, right? And so basically this, I think, is a good barometer for inclusivity.
Thank you, Naya. I'm going to invite a few of our guests attendees to ask their questions. So a hand is up from Andre Thomashausen. Andre, nice to see you. Please turn your video on and ask your question. Thank you very much.
Okay, not sure if my video turned on, if that is actually possible.
Well, it doesn't matter, Andre. We can hear you nice and clearly. Oh, you've disappeared, I think. Okay, I'm sure Andre will rejoin us. So let's go to Louise Jimbo. Louise, if you can ask your question, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm calling from Angola, and so my question is by Mr. Bayane. I have several experience working in Mozambique as an international observer, and so my question is basically, from your argument, I understood that the alternative power through transparent election and a president, a deputy, and a local government between RENAMO or FRELIMO or MTM, you strongly believe that will be afford to promote the reconciliation process. But my question, I would like to hear more about you to say, how do you think that those alternatives will also promote inclusion of youth, of those family ex-combatant, because reconciliation is also about inclusion of those majority people, who is women, youth. How do you think that change the power will promote more inclusion of the entire society in Mozambique? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. Chaloka, just hold on and we'll get Andre Thomashausen, I think. I see he's back. Andre, if you would like to ask your question.
Hi, Alex and everyone. I just want to read 3 lines out of the speech of Mrs. Mogherini exactly a year ago. I quote, she said, "This is why I am proud today to announce that the European Union has already allocated 60 million to support the implementation of the agreement that you have signed today, and I hope that many will follow our example." I may be mistaken, but I believe, Ambassador Manzoni, you administer the funds. And the very pertinent question is, will there be transparency? Will there be some kind of accounting? Where are the 60 million? Where are the other funds? And why are they not used to offer a more commensurate pay to the people to be demobilized? Will these funds actually last for the next 9 years? If we say that we can demobilize 500 people per year, then we will take 10 years to demobilize 5,000. So this is, I hope you can help us understand this. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. So let me go to Chaloka first and answer the first question, and then I'll ask Mirko to answer the question from Andre Thomashausen. Chaloka, please.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm not quite sure that I understood the question very well, but my views on that subject, picking up from where we left off and what Eduardo also said, is that the key issue is the electoral process in terms of inclusion, legitimacy, as well as respectability for the outcome. I think examples are not very far. The political crisis in Kenya was because of that. The political crisis in Cote d'Ivoire, 2010, 2011, was also a result of that. So the key aspect to the success of decentralization and the elections at that level is obviously to inspire confidence in the election. The second thing I would say is that it's not so much about alternative power structures, because when you look at the constitutional framework of Mozambique, it's quite clear that it remains a unitary state. And decentralization is then defined at various levels: national, provincial, district, and municipalities. Now, all of those provide opportunities for elections, for representation, for leadership of different categories of individuals, much more. In terms of whether it's the men, the youth, or the women, I think the overriding principle, as agreed by the principles in terms of decentralization, was that the party that wins the majority of the votes at all that level, in all those levels, I think, other than in the city municipal elections will appoint the governors or the leaders. So again, it's down to the political parties in terms of representation, and of course for the population to make claims to the political parties in terms of broader representation through decentralization. I would also like to make a further point about inclusion. This is not just about political inclusion, it's also about socioeconomic inclusion. I mean, the reason why decentralization works in most places is that a decentralized unit has to be economically viable as an entity. It requires resources, it requires transparency and accountability on the part of those who run the decentralized units. And without those, the idea of social inclusion, socioeconomic inclusion, would be eluded, whether there is decentralization or not. The same point goes to the whole issue of demobilization and reintegration. It is not so much about reintegration itself per se, it's also about socio-economic rehabilitation of the former fighters and combatants at a social level, at a more basic level. The removal of stigmatization as well because of their former roles. When I was Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs, I visited quite a number of countries, post-conflict situations, where DDR processes had failed because integration was seen much more as fine, disarm, we give you an economic package, you go home, and then you find something else to do. When that package runs out, then those persons involved go back to the best way they know how, which is to fight or get involved in criminality. So a lot more has to be done at this social economic level to ensure that reintegration is followed by rehabilitation as well.
Thank you, Chiloka. Mirko, maybe you'd like to respond to Andre Thomashausen and his question about
yes.
Mogherini.
First, maybe regarding transparency, the funds we are using, it's true that at the very end, I'm responsible of the use of these funds. These funds, they are administrated by UNOPS. I'm not managing the funds directly, of course. But going back to the question of the European Union, apart from that, I'm not really myself directly the one that should justify the use of these funds. But what I can say is that in the speech of Mogherini, what he said is true. The European Union has decided to allocate 60 million to support the implementation of the peace agreement, which does not mean that all these funds, they will enter into the peace secretariat directly. Part of the funds we are using today, they are coming from the European Union. In the budget we are using to reintegrate the people, we have now the 5,000. The budget is financed by 9 donors, 9 different donors. There is Europe, there is Canada, there is Ireland, Switzerland, and a few others, and the UK, a few other donors. So the rest, I would say the European Union is considering also to use the funds that Mogherini was talking about in order to create opportunity for business, for instance, opportunity for development in the regions where the combatants, they are going home. But I don't know why this question is constantly coming back. I think it's the European Union first that should answer to these issues. I don't doubt that they will try to use these funds, but and additionally 50 million for the DDR or 60 million for the DDR process is a bit too much. We have a smaller budget. Concerning pension is different. The budget for pension, in order to ensure the pension to the 5,000 or to the one that they will have a right, is probably bigger than 60 million, to be very honest. It could be probably something like 100 million. So I think we need to make a bigger effort in that sense. Regarding the 500 demobilized per year, I mean, this year, despite of COVID and despite of all difficulties, we are now at 10% of the 5,000, so a bit more than 500 people demobilized. So I think we go ahead and we plan to demobilize the 5,000 in the next 18 months, not in I don't know 10 years, because if we demobilize, in this case, if 500 now, we can go for holidays till end of the year. But we are planning to continue to work, and in 18 months, we really believe that we can demobilize completely all the 5,000 people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mirko. I did see some hands that were up that went down. So, Case, did you have a question? Because I saw as a panelist your hand went up, but it then went down again. Do you want to ask a question? No? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
No, and since Mirko came back to the pensions, maybe put that in, because I do think, I mean, linking to the question that I questioned the list of 5,000, in particular, whether there are any transparent criteria underpinning that list, or whether it is just a list put up. And then, of course, once there would be some discussion on a pension, which I think is very structural and could be very important in the broader political sense, would there be any criteria? Is there already discussion on any criteria for RENAMO participation in such pension scheme? Because a question that I would assume would come up is whether any combatant that ever fought for RENAMO, even if demobilized after Rome, would also be eligible. And, you know, many of those, I assume, that are currently on the list of 5,000 would not qualify for such a criteria, based on such a criteria. So this is again a follow-up to Mirko.
Okay, so we have a follow-up to Mirko. And Mirko,
I can answer if you want.
Yeah,
very simple. Simple is not simple. The question of pension is relatively complicated, to be honest. But you know, there was a discussion, of course, at the level of the military commission to decide for just for instance, how many years of service how many years of service they have this combatant. So the compromise has been for 20 years, because, you know, in the pension system you can have 10, 20, 35 years. So we decided for 20 in order to make, let's say, everybody happy. And you know, some they have more than 20, some they have less than 20. But at the end of the day, at the moment you will enter into the pension system, of course, we need to apply rules and regulation of the pension system of Mozambique. We cannot invent a specific rule. And that discussion will, of course, come back. There will be people that they will fulfill criteria to get the pension from now, and people that they have to wait for that pension. But another point which is critical, of course, you have to understand that no one of these persons, they never paid any contribution, of course. So the capital to pay this pension need to be created, which is not so impossible. But again, it needs a discussion, it needs goodwill, and I believe that it is possible. Otherwise, I would not be here talking about that. But it's possible.
Thank you, Mirko. I have another question, which is by Professor Marlin Newitt. And Professor Marlin Newitt is the author of a short modern history of Mozambique, as I remember. Marlin, please ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly, Marlin. Thank you.
Good. The original 1992 peace agreement was criticized because it did not contain any element of power sharing. It was essentially a winner-takes-all agreement. And it seems to me that the DDR is the same. It's a winner-takes-all agreement, even though there's an element of decentralization to the provinces. So I would like to ask Mirko or Nia or somebody, if in the discussions leading to this most recent peace accord, was any discussion about power sharing?
Marlin, thank you very much. Which of the panelists is best to answer this question? Mirko, who do you think would be the best person?
I mean, we are all in the same boat, in a sense that the question of, but I think Chaloka or Nea can also.
Yeah, so maybe we'll have all three of you.
Yeah, power sharing was basically the biggest concern of the whole agreement, of course. And therefore, the focus was at the beginning, the revision of the constitution. I don't know if Chaloka or Nea, they would like to add more.
Yeah, Chaloka, would you like to jump in here and flesh out this point a bit?
Thank you. I would have preferred Neha to go first, but I would reflect on what Meko did say. Although I think Professor Nyusi kind of underestimates the role of decentralization, I think the question he asked very much reflects the point I made at the very outset, that decentralization is underplayed, and yet it was the key to this whole agreement, including the National Accord for Peace and Reconciliation, because it was seen as an inclusive way of sharing power, at least at provincial, district, as well as municipalities. And I can say that when we met with the late President Lakama, I only made one trip. Meko and Neha made so many. But somehow I was like I got there about 10 minutes earlier than everyone else. But in that 10 minutes, we had a very intense discussion. I was struck by his agility and his strategy. And he was quite clear that, look, we see decentralization as a partnership in terms of establishing peace for the country. But in establishing this partnership, what we want in terms of political inclusion is to be able to have a provincial government in the areas where we have political support and we have electoral victory. That was the essence of the power sharing arrangement, and pointing out to the past elections where RENAMO had won the majority of the seats in the provinces, but the constitutional framework itself was clearly an obstacle, which is why, as Meko says, the key aspect was then to amend the constitution on the basis of the agreement that had been made between within the commissions and an agreement between the two parties. But it's quite clear in my mind that both President Nyusi and the late President Lakama drove this process in partnership. They needed each other, for it to go that far. So in a sense, that was the beginning of a power sharing arrangement, or the understanding of it between the two principles, which then went down to the commissions and the amendment of the constitution. In terms of DDR, if I might say, well, the National Accord for Peace and Reconciliation, it was an outcome of decentralization. If decentralization had not succeeded, I think RENAMO was quite clear. They would not move a step forward towards demobilization, disintegration. So these two pieces have to be seen as part of a symbiotic process. They are linked at the hip and tied, together. The fact that RENAMO did agree to demobilize was also based on certain conditions and perceptions that I think Meko and Neha have also mentioned about, respect for their officers, their fighters, and their fighters being taken care of in terms of pensions, reintegration, and other activities. So in that sense, the partnership is driven through. So I wouldn't see the National Accord defined in terms of the winner takes all. It was a shared outcome by both parties. And the spirit of the entire process, I think, ran on that particular theme. That's my view. Neha might agree, Ambassador Meko might disagree, but that's my analysis.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I just wanted to sort of go back a little bit. The major difference between, and of course agreed with everything Mirko and Chaloka said, they put it way more eloquently than I'm about to, but very, very quickly, the major difference between this peace agreement and all the rest, and including the efforts, is simply that this one was, it did not follow the normal trajectory of conflict and conflict resolution. You usually have a crisis, you have peace talks, and then you have an agreement and then implementation. It follows a sequence. Because of the previous peace process that unfortunately did not lead to much fruition, in this one we had our work cut out for us. First, we had to reinstate faith in the international actors. We had to reinstate faith in processes, and therefore we had a lot of confidence building mechanisms throughout the process. 2019, yes, is the anniversary, I mean, is the signing of the peace agreement. But the peace agreement, if one looks closely, is the decentralization bill as an annex and the memorandum of understanding. Both these things happened in 2018. It was at that point in 2018 that really there was what you can say a different peace agreement, because it was on that basis, as Chaloka says, that there was enough comfort to then sign a peace agreement the year after. We were implementing as we were going on. Today you have RENAMO offices in senior places in the army. You have RENAMO offices in the police. Step by step, slowly by slowly, what has been agreed in the memorandum of understanding, which is quite a substantive document, was negotiated while President Lakama was still alive. And it had his vision. And Chaloka, of course, says it very well, that he was very clear in what he wanted and what he didn't want, and the vision that he saw. But of course, Eduardo is much better to answer this particular point. But in terms of, I think one needs to look at this peace accord, the Maputo Accord, holistically, the bigger picture, and also read the entire document.
Eduardo, do you want to add anything to this conversation at this stage? Because we're finishing shortly. We're going to have Bishop Carlos making his final remarks. So this is your last opportunity to intervene.
Yes, Alex, thank you. I agree with what Professor Chaloka said, what Mirko and Neha said. Of course, there was a trust that the process would follow through all the agreements that were made. The decentralization was not only to picture in the Constitution, it was to solve or to accommodate a particular agreement. How can we share the power without violating the Constitution? So it was necessary that this piece of legislation be brought into the Constitution to allow that if the situation that we had in the previous elections repeats itself in the next election, 2019, then there will be a constitutional provision that would allow RENAMO to have the governance in the provinces where it got majority within the framework of the Constitution. This was the hope. And once this was agreed, of course, RENAMO understood that there was no reason why it should hold the other processes, which was the DDR process, to move forward while waiting for the elections to happen. Unfortunately, as I indicated earlier, the elections of 2019 did not provide the opportunity to implement the agreement because the elections were not transparent. The elections were fraudulent. So in this case, we can say that the expectation of the implementation of the agreement was defrauded by the rigging of the elections in 2019. And regardless, since the military process was going on, we could not stop that process because the elections of 2019 have gone wrong. And this was a commitment of President Afonso Dhlakama when he declared a cessation of hostilities in December. And he said that there's no reason why we should resort to fighting again. Whatever happens, we have to follow the process without resorting into, guns or fighting and so on. My call here is let's continue moving with the DDR process. But let us not forget where we are coming from. Let us not forget what is the cause of all these conflicts. And the only solution to this, in my view, is we have to have elections that allow people to decide who is going to be elected. And the only way to do that is to have credible elections, transparent and fair elections. Otherwise, the decentralization will not serve the purpose and which was established in the Constitution, because it will just be another provision in the Constitution, but it will not be reflecting the debate and the agreement that was reached between the government and RENAMO in order to settle these conflicts peacefully. So definitely, we have this issue to go back to. The decentralization is not only a theory, we have to make it happen. And the only way we can make it happen is to make sure we have free and fair and transparent elections. Then we will see that the reasons for conflicts will no longer be there, because wherever RENAMO is elected, truthfully will be ruling in that province, not in the current situation where the will of the people is not being respected. And by not respecting the will of the people, we are also not respecting the agreement of decentralization that was reached within this peace process.
Thank you, Eduardo. I'm going to hand over now for the final reflections. He's been listening very closely for the last 2 hours, is Bishop Carlos Simão Matinha, and he is currently the 11th Anglican Bishop of Limbombo, the second Mozambican born to take that position. His predecessor, Dinis Sengolani, Bishop Dinis Sengolani, was very involved in earlier versions of this peace process and used his good offices. Indeed, even before the Rome General Peace Accord, I remember him being engaged, and also in 2012 and 2013. The Anglican Church has played quite an important role in trying to facilitate peace and reconciliation in Mozambique. Bishop Carlos, you were also an observer, an official one, to the ceremony a year ago today, probably just around this time right now. You were actually on the stage witnessing the hug between Mr. Ossufo Momade and President Nyusi and the signing of the Maputo Accord. Please, we welcome your reflections at the end of this reflection on 1 year of the Maputo Accord.
Well, thank you very much to Chatham House for inviting me to be part of this discussion. And thank you very much to my fellow panelists and to all the audience and people who are participating in this webinar for such a big interest on the issue of the peace process in Mozambique. Of course, today is the 6th of August, and then it's exactly 1 year of the peace agreement of Maputo. So thank you. I have been listening and I have been reminded a lot of things, and I just want to thank you. I have got only 4 things to comment about as a way of making some remarks. First of all is that the issue of peace building is a long process in itself, not only for Mozambique, but also we have witnessed that in other places in the world, that peace building, it starts, but it keeps growing and growing and growing. So we are in a long journey to real peace in Mozambique. And the steps that have been taken, particularly since after this last peace agreement, I think they are somewhat encouraging. And we want to encourage both the government, the FRELIMO party, RENAMO, and all other political parties to engage together in this long walk towards peace. Because in the end, I hope that Mozambique can become a peaceful country. It takes courage. It was mentioned here several times. It takes courage it takes involvement, and it takes confidence of the various sectors of the society of Mozambique, various political parties to engage in this peace process. not only through dialogue, but through actions that may make every citizen feel happy with their participation in the building up of our own country. So this is the first thing that I want to note, that it is a process which takes its own time. Secondly, I want to talk about the DDR, just to say that indeed, on my point of view, it has taken long to be able to show the first signs that DDR is going to happen. But happily now we have seen some steps taken, and we do hope that the DDR agreements and the process is going to be carried out to the end until the 5,000 people from the RENAMO are demobilized and reintegrated into the normal life. That is our hope. Therefore, it is very important that the action plan which has been drawn, I think our friend has explained very well that it was necessary to prepare to build up an action plan which is clear and effective. And therefore, we just hope that that plan should be really implemented step by step until integration is really happening. The issue of the package, I mean, which the combatants, former combatants of RENAMO receive, is an important one. But it is our view that it should not end there, because a package, you can use it and it gets finished, and then you can come to square one, and then the life is very hard. So those combatants first need to be helped with skills, and they will need support in order to develop whatever skills they have so that they can make a living in the community. But also, it is very important that they deserve to have a pension so that they can really rely on that, because some of them, their age is very well advanced, and therefore it's very important to have pension. They have got families, they have got children, they have got things, a lot of things to be able to do so. It is, the package itself is not sufficient, but more than the package is necessary, and the pension is very, very important to be able to recover their own lives and the lost time which they have incurred during the times that have been in the bush fighting. So we will support that as church, and you know, I think many people in the community would really support that they are given a better and comfortable treatment so that they cannot think going back to fighting. The third comment, remark which I would like to make is about the elections. As Edouard Namuret has mentioned several times, I think free, fair, and transparent elections are a very good and big key for peace in Mozambique. We need to, as a country and as politicians and churchmen and church women and as a society, we need to respect the genuine winners of a particular area. That's very important. For us as well, we had understood that the decentralization process would really enable RENAMO to be able to win elections and appoint governors in some of the provinces. That was the expectation. But unfortunately, what has happened is totally different. I cannot discuss deeply the whys about that, but I think if we had governors from RENAMO, that would have been an immediate step to show that the issue of power sharing and the results of that change of constitution to decentralization is already bearing fruits. And I want to hope that in the future, really power sharing and democracy can take place where everyone else and every political party with an expression can really participate in the development and construction of a peaceful country. So that's our position. The fourth thing which I want to comment on or to remark on is what has been mentioned also several times, the issue of teamwork. I think the ruling party and all other political parties have to develop this spirit of teamwork. In Mozambique, we used to say, well, the FRELIMO people and the RENAMO people, when they are in the public, they're enemies. But you find several times that RENAMO followers and FRELIMO followers meet together as sometimes as part of families, as relatives or as friends. They invite one another to social events and those kind of things. We needed to translate that experience that we live in our families into the political arena so that really the peace building can make sense in Mozambique. There's no point of fighting endlessly, because we are spending a lot of time and spending a lot of energy to which we should use in building our own nation and give a legacy to our children. So we want to say that it's not only between political parties, but this teamwork should also take into cognizance the participation of other vital forces in the country, like the church leadership. Talking about the church, I'm really talking about these religious confessions, because fortunately in Mozambique we have got this wealth of unity and understanding, and between the religious confessions like Christians and the Islamic religion and other religions. We have got platforms in which we discuss common interest things and make decisions and work together, those kind of things. So the religious part of Mozambique can really play a very important role in this process of teamwork and peace building and nation building. But also you have got the civil society components. So we have to take into cognizance those elements so that there is an inclusion. Our state president, in his inaugural speech at the first elections, he stressed a lot the issue of inclusion. And he also speaks about that even now. So we want to see that inclusion take big steps so that our country can be peaceful and everybody can be comfortable. Then we can be able to face other sorts of conflicts or other enemies that may be coming into Mozambique. We have got this issue of Cabo Delgado. We need the RENAMO and FRELIMO and everybody else to join together, join hands, so that we can identify who is this new enemy, what is about this conflict, how can we approach, how can we really bring up a solution. So it's important that we become one nation. I want to thank the international community. I want to thank Mirko and all other role players in this process for the interest, the sacrifices, and really for the keen involvement, like fundraising, things of that nature, in order to help us to go through our issues and be able to come into a fair and a democratic country. So thank you very much. I think one of the panelists also spoke about listening to what the Mozambicans say silently. There's a lot of silent unity, of course, and there's a lot of silent desire to really not go back to fighting and build our one country, which is our country. So thank you very much for this opportunity. These are the 4 comments which I would have liked to make.
Bishop Carlos, I want to thank you very much. And we're all going to go silent and reflect in a moment because we're finishing now. So as Alex Vines, the director of the Africa program at Chatham House, I want to thank all panelists and speakers, also all attendees who were with us either on Zoom or Facebook Live. And this meeting was recorded, so it will be made available to anyone who wants to watch it, and it will be put up on the internet. So please remain safe, remain healthy, and I hope to meet you all again very soon.